Hey everybody, it's Emily at ARC Schooling, and welcome back to another episode of Homeschool Tidbits. Welcome back to Build Your Library's Homeschool Tidbits. Today we're doing episode 30, and we're going to talk about 5 tips to make history come alive. In this weekly video series, I will delve briefly into a topic related to homeschooling, and I'll share some of my knowledge and expertise as a homeschooling mother of 4 children, 3 of whom have graduated and 1 who is a college graduate. When I was growing up, I loved history. I've always been kind of a history nerd, and I just loved learning about what the world was like in different time periods. And as an adult, I still do. It's still one of my favorite things to read and learn about. And it makes me kind of sad when I hear parents lamenting that they hated history in school and dread having to teach it to their children, or that their children find it boring and pointless. History can, in fact, be fascinating. What is history but the story of humanity? It's a story. We all love stories. So today I'm sharing some tried and true tips to help make history something both you and your child become passionate about. Tip number 1, start with a field trip. This is a simple activity that you can do that will go a long way toward making your children interested in a historical period. First, see what options you have locally. Not everyone can be lucky enough to live within an hour of Colonial Williamsburg or the Alamo or other famous landmarks. Maybe there is a living history museum nearby, or perhaps you can find another historical site that you could visit within a reasonable travel distance. Besides places local to your home, think about any regular vacation spots where your family might frequent. Next time, check if there's a historical location nearby that you could plan spending a day there. Even going to a Renaissance fair or Shakespeare in the Park could both be great educational outings masquerading as something is just for fun. Seeing history right in front of you brings it to life in a way that a book just can't. Before you go, talk a little bit about what they should be looking for and why this is a significant place, and then just enjoy the journey with them. Tip number 2 is to read historical fiction. Of course, I'm going to recommend books. Reading great historical fiction can bring a time period to life. It's one thing to know that there was an event called the Boston Tea Party in the 1700s, but reading a book like Johnny Tremain will put you right smack in the middle of it. Now you have a mental peg to really hold on to that information. Maybe your child wants to know what it was like to be an African American during that time period. Read the Seeds of America trilogy, starting with Chains by Laurie Halse Anderson, or if you have a teen, you might read something like Someone Knows My Name by Lawrence Hill. Both set during the events of the American Revolution. Historical fiction is such a great way to really put yourself into a historical period. A well-researched living book can show you what life is like for ordinary people in that time. What kind of foods did they eat? What kind of clothing did they wear? What was their worldview like, and how is it different from yours? And so much more. It's almost like time traveling. Need more recommendations for great historical fiction, categorized and sorted by time period? Be sure to check out History Book by Book, linked down below. Tip number 3 is watch movies and documentaries. Much like historical fiction, historical movies can be a great way to get your child interested in a time period that you're studying. And there are some truly fantastic movies, but depending on the age of your child, you might want to preview them first just to make sure they're appropriate. I love a good historical film or documentary because it can really put you in the time period visually. One downside is that many historical movies can be filled with inaccuracies. Maybe they are taking creative liberties to make the story more exciting, or they simply make mistakes with what people were wearing or doing in that time period. Even so, if you want your child to really remember a historical event or figure, a movie is a great way to do that. And if it's inaccurate, that's not that bad, because you can use that as a way to further your research. Find out what the movie got wrong together, Make this a fun research deep dive that leads you to more information about life in that time period. Just seeing what life is like or what cities looked like 100, 200, even 1,000 years ago really can make history click. Walking the streets of ancient Rome, Renaissance England, Gilded Age New York City was so vastly and dramatically different from walking around your hometown today in every way imaginable. Tip number 4, look at history through a different lens. Is your child bored with the typical scope and sequence of history? Try something different. Maybe your child is a budding scientist. Study the history of science. Do they love to cook? Study the history of cooking. Is your child a dancer or a musician? You get the idea. Learn about the history behind their interest and watch them suddenly become passionate historians. This can take you down so many fascinating rabbit trails. You can study the history of video games. You can study film history, even the history of technology like computers and smartphones. Tip number 5, keep a historic timeline. I've talked about this before, even in my previous tidbit. Using a timeline is a great way to help your child really see the scope of history. It's easy to think that America has just been around forever when you're 12, like you have no scope of that. But there are civilizations and cultures that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. The US is barely a blip. A timeline can give your child a vastly different perspective of history. If you use a notebook to keep your timeline in, like our Book of Centuries, for example, it can be like creating your own history text, filled with things that you have learned through your studies. What a great way to develop a sense of history. And now a bonus tip. Let your child take the lead. Sometimes all our kids need is a sense of power over their learning. If you're trying to study ancient Egypt, but they're obsessed with Six the Musical, which is, if you don't know, a musical about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, then change up what you're studying to match their interest. If they love Six the Musical, read about Henry VIII and his wives, learn about what happened after his death and his 3 children, Edward VI, Mary Tudor, and Elizabeth I. Maybe your child has been keeping up with current events and really want to learn more about the political system and elections. Study government and politics instead of ancient history. Let them follow their interests, and suddenly everything becomes much more interesting to them. Learning history never has to be dull or dry. Ditch the boring textbooks and try some of these tips and ideas instead and watch your child become a budding historian. If you found this video helpful, Build Your Library is a secular, literature-rich homeschool curriculum inspired by Charlotte Mason's philosophy of education. Based on nearly 20 years of homeschooling, I created the curriculum that I wish I'd had when I started homeschooling my children. I have spent thousands of hours cultivating the best literature to enhance your child's studies. Our lesson plans make homeschooling simple. Just open our lesson plans, gather your books, and go. Our easy-to-use lesson plans include everything you need to homeschool. Just add math. Choose from our full year K-12 levels as fun topical unit studies and our newest product, Lit Bites. With Build Your Library, you will cultivate a home library filled with captivating literature, and you'll raise children who become lifelong learners. So snuggle up with our lesson plans and a great book or 3 and have your best homeschool year ever. I hope you found this tidbit to be helpful. Let me know down below in the comments, what is your favorite historical time period to study? I think my favorite is probably Tudor England, Victorian England, and World War II Holocaust. I don't think this is news to anybody who follows me. I hope you found this tidbit to be helpful. Come back next week for more homeschooling inspiration. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.